Welcome to the Provider's Report, where we delve into the world of value-based healthcare. Our mission is to empower healthcare providers with the knowledge and tools they need to deliver exceptional patient care. Each episode, we explore best practices, innovative strategies, and real-world examples of how to achieve the highest standards in patient communication and outcomes. Join us as we transform the future of healthcare, one conversation at a time.
Today's episode is sponsored by the Smart Chiropractor and their new book called The Payday Practice. So I'm sure you guys have heard of people like Seth Godin, Gary Vaynerchuk, and Tim Ferriss. How do you think they would build a chiropractic practice? The answer is in The Payday Practice, a brand new book by Dr. Jeff Langmaid and Dr. Jason Deitch. This new book will show you exactly how to cover your monthly expenses in one day, every single month, guaranteed. That's huge. Whether you want to cover your monthly expenses for your physical practice or create a digital healthcare practice for the future, this book is your blueprint for building it, launching it, and growing it. Get your free copy today at www.thepaydaypractice.com. Their step-by-step guide to financial freedom will show you how to 1. Set your dreams, visions, and goals using their financial freedom formula. 2. Build a health tribe of people who are engaged and ready to go all in with your business. 3. Create an irresistible membership offer for your clients and patients. And 4. Launch and sell out your membership in the next 30 days. The Payday Practice will show you the exact step-by-step process that you can use to generate monthly recurring revenue in your practice. Get your free copy today at www.thepaydaypractice.com. That's www.thepaydaypractice.com. I already got mine, guys, so it's your turn next. I also recommend checking out The Smart Chiropractor on Facebook and also their Instagram page, which is at The Smart Chiro, for more amazing knowledge to take your practice to the next level. Hey, everybody. We are here with Dr. Nathan Cashion, and we're going to be talking about the next Enneagram type, which is going to be type 5. We are really excited. So first off, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's fun to be on the other side of the microphone, so to speak.
I love having other podcasters on. It's always a good time. So before we dive into the Enneagram, of course, please go ahead and give us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I grew up in California, fairly active, nothing terribly extreme, soccer and running and things like that. And then went to university and did exercise science in Utah. From there, I worked a couple years in an education nonprofit for the state of Utah, and then decided to go to chiropractic school. So I went to the University of Western States in Portland, Oregon, where I got my master's in exercise and sports science, along with a Doctor of Chiropractic degree. And right after that, I practiced around Portland, doing both a private practice that I was starting to build on my own, as well as locum, or vacation relief chiropractic, so covering in different clinics around the area. That only lasted about a year before we moved to South Dakota. So then moved to South Dakota, where I was, for the most part, a stay-at-home dad. We had 2 kids while we were there, and just over a year ago, maybe a year and a half now, moved back to the Oregon area right around Portland. And kind of throughout from chiropractic school until now, I've been involved with an organization called World Spine Care. And that's where I spend most of my time now. I've kind of slowly increased the time and different responsibilities that I have with World Spine Care. And so that takes up most of my time now.
That's awesome. World Spine Care is such a great organization. And to all of our listeners who are not familiar, we will definitely be linking it in the show notes because they do great work. I mean, I could go on, but I love that you're involved with them. And I did not know you were increasingly, vamping up your work with them. I'm sure the kids are probably getting a little older.
Yeah. So we've finally been able to get them into full-time daycare. And so that leaves some time for me to be able to do more. Still not full, it's still kind of a part-time thing. And I will say that, this interview is personal, just about me. So nothing that I say is, in any way reflects World Spine Care. But if you're curious about it, please go check out worldspinecare.org and get involved in any way. If you're involved in spine care, whether chiropractic, physiotherapy, we have plenty of ways for people to get involved.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. So, as we talked about before, you are an Enneagram Type 5, which I love because as we were just chatting about before we started recording here, just kind of reading through what the Type 5 is, known as the Investigator, I can already tell that this just suits you really, really well. And so I'm excited to dive in. But I'm curious, did you know about the Enneagram test before this interview? Is this the first time you've taken it?
I've known about it for a while. My brother and my sister-in-law are deep into the Enneagram. They have read multiple books. I gave them one book that maybe we'll talk about here in a bit. A few years ago for Christmas, and so I've known about it in passing. And then maybe a year or two ago, my wife and I kind of decided to take it. So we did what I think is the official test on the Enneagram Institute, and got this long PDF with my 3 high scoring types that kind of give a good description. And it certainly. I certainly identify with a lot of the characteristics of the Type 5 investigator.
What do you think? I mean, were you shocked at all, or were you kind of like, I think this does suit me?
No, I wouldn't say I was shocked. I'm always skeptical. I've done the Myers-Briggs type multiple times, and it almost always comes out exactly the same from what I can remember. I can never remember exactly what it is, but I did it in junior college and probably in university again. And then my wife kind of around the same time, it's like, oh, why don't we do, the Myers-Briggs ones as well, just to compare.
Yeah.
And again, I identify with almost, all of the characteristics. There's always something a little bit different, but I'm always, skeptical. These things are not really well validated in the literature and that type of stuff. But I do think they're really interesting ways to explore who you are and how you relate to other people.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the biggest reason why I wanted to do this series, because in general, personality tests are difficult when it comes to validation and data. But even more importantly, there's hardly anything out there on personality tests for healthcare providers, and especially the Enneagram and healthcare providers. And what better way to get to know ourselves as providers and even get to understand and better focus on our patients as individuals as well, just to be able to pinpoint little key differences between us. I think it can go a long way. So for our listeners, Type 5, just really briefly, I want to go ahead and read just a quick blurb. Type 5s are known as being alert, insightful, curious. They're able to concentrate and focus on really complex ideas and skills. They tend to be really independent and innovative and inventive. And I loved this for you because you embody that to me so much, and you're always working on the next big thing. You're very you're very intuitive. You are you always want to know, okay, what can I learn today? And I love that about you. And that is this type full force.
Yeah, I wish it said that I can actually finish something.
I did read one thing about how one of the few negative characteristics was that you start so many projects and then it is hard to finish them all.
Exactly. And that's true in so many ways. I mean, right now, I've gotten into reading a lot lately. And so I use Goodreads to kind of keep track of where I am and how many books I read. And I think right now I have 10 books in progress, because as soon as I finish one, I say to myself, okay, let's just finish the rest. But I can't. There's always another one I want to read.
Yeah.
And that's the same with so many different projects that I like to do. And it does. The thing that I read talks about just wanting to learn more, intensely determined to pursue the questions and ideas that fascinate them. And that certainly rings true.
Yeah. So in healthcare, what do you think would be the biggest strength of this type? When you were practicing, or even with your work with World Spine Care, is there a specific characteristic or something that you're really happy that you have as a personality trait that has come through?
Well, I think there's certainly that drive to know more and to understand things better. It can be very helpful. And I don't know that I'm a great example of this, but it makes me think of another one of my favorite podcasters, which is Peter Attia, who's a medical doctor and has a huge podcast. And I think he typifies this. I have no idea what his Enneagram type would be, but he has a whole team of analysts who read the literature and condense it for him and use that to allow them to make better decisions for their patients. Wow. And, if I could afford that, I would certainly do that in my practice as well. And there's other people who I went to school with who I imagine fit that as well. Systematize things to pull in the latest knowledge from the research and make that applicable to their practice. So I think that drive to know more and to understand things better can really be powerful as a healthcare provider.
Oh, definitely. I to be honest, as a type 1 myself, that's one of the things I'm most jealous of when it comes to this type, because although we're also obsessed with analytics and input and learning, it's in a different way. So personally, as a type 1, if I'm going to learn something and apply it to life or practice or anything like that, I have to do it so perfectly. So let's say I want to do something now. I won't jump on it until it's 1000% perfect in the way it should be. And that can be tough in the world of healthcare because research is not perfect. The newest knowledge out there might not be perfect, but we have this problem where we can't just do 10 projects. We need to focus all of our attention on one and make sure that it is outstanding before anyone in the world sees it. So I'm jealous of somebody like you who can do all of these amazing things all at once and just be, 1000% into multiple things. I think that's a huge, huge skill. And that's probably beneficial as a student too, I would think.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because type 1 is kind of my second highest score. And so I identify a lot with that, a lot of perfectionism and not being willing to kind of put things out there until they're as good as I think they should be. And that's something I've tried to overcome. And so, I feel a lot of the same jealousy. Yeah, as a student, it's funny. One word that I use oftentimes to describe myself is meta, right? So metacognition is the thinking about the thinking. And in studying, I would often spend my time studying about how to study better.
I love it.
Rather than actually studying things.
Yeah.
Because that was just it's been a fascination of mine for quite a long time, probably because I struggled. I got to a point in university, I'd done fairly well in middle school, high school, but then in university I started to struggle. And so I had to figure out, why am I struggling? And so I spent a lot of time learning how to learn better.
That's amazing. So I'm just curious, because that sounds to me like a lot of my old philosophy courses in undergrad. Were you ever into philosophy, or like the idea of thinking, like those deeper concepts and deeper notions?
Philosophy in itself felt so inaccessible, so vague. And I don't know if that's a type 5 thing, or maybe just a different aspect of my personality of liking things being concrete.
Yes.
And
that might be the type 1 coming out too.
Philosophy in itself was difficult. Although lately I've become more and more interested in that. But no, for me, it was kind of, at the same time, learning more about the scientific method, learning about research. And so wanting to find out, what does research say about how we learn? And then trying to apply that to being a student. Yeah.
And one of the things I love that the Enneagram Institute does is they have a huge list on their website for every single type, with like famous people and celebrities that are the same types as you. Have you seen some of yours? It's quite impressive.
Yeah, the report I got has a few. Okay. And it's, it's definitely ego boosting.
Oh, yes. I mean, this list is Buddha.
Yeah.
Einstein. Pretty impressive. Stephen Hawking. These are some really incredible people.
One of my favorites is on there. Well, there's Bill Gates, who I quite like. Gary Larson, who is the illustrator for the Far Side comics, which for years in high school, that was on my desk. I would have like the 365 day, because I just love the Far Side. Wow. But the one that I quite like is John Nash. The movie A Beautiful Mind was about this guy. He's a mathematician.
I've seen that.
And I loved calculus when I was in high school, and in junior college, I took it again. And I would get so focused, like such flow. And in the movie, it depicts him doing this thing where he would put the back of his hand on his forehead as he was thinking through a problem. And I actually did that when I was doing calculus. Like as I was doing my calculus
My
homework, I would kind of
gosh.
get so into it that I had that same sort of, I don't know if it's a tick, but yeah. So a lot of these examples, I'm like, oh yeah, I don't mind being compared to them.
No, I think the one that's the most wild to me is Kurt Cobain.
I
Apparently
don't
was
really, I know who he was, but I don't know anything about him.
yeah, literally, I don't know about his personality wise, obviously, but hey, I mean, that to be associated with all of those other names and then Kurt Cobain, I'm like, okay, very interesting. So that makes me almost want to dive in and learn more about who he was.
Yeah, that is
Very
curious.
cool. So obviously I know I'm talking up this type quite a bit because I find it fascinating, but there's a lot of positives. So to you, when you're kind of diving into type 5, what do you think could potentially be a negative as a healthcare provider? Is there anything that you think would be something for our type 5 listeners to kind of pull away and know, hey, this is going to be a weak spot for me. Maybe this is something I need to improve upon or stay cognizant of as I practice.
Yeah, maybe this is a little bit more type 1, but I think that idea of being analytical, being curious, being a little bit, at least for me, being really focused on what the research says. I heard it throughout school all the time that, patients don't care what the latest studies say. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? That ditty that we hear all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that certainly was a roadblock for me. I mean, not just with patients, but just with everybody. I want to share the things that I learn
Yes.
because I become very passionate about them. And rather than, having that strength of making the emotional connections with your patients, so there really is a balance there, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but certainly for me, if we go back to the Myers-Briggs, I'm like 99.9% introverted. and even the type 5 is described as, where is it? Somewhere, I think a bit reclusive, or I'm not sure what the wording they used is. There's probably a better word than that. Detached, preoccupied, isolated. Yeah. I mean, those are not, you wouldn't put those on a resume for getting a job in a healthcare practice. And so those are things that you're going to struggle with, I think, as a type 5.
So how do you overcome that? I mean, if we do have some other type 5 listeners, what would you recommend that you've noticed, in your experience of how you can overcome that, and not overcome it to where you completely ignore a part of who you are, but just ways that you can still be a great provider, but still recognize where you might be falling short?
I wish I knew. I don't think, again, that I can say that I have overcome that. I mean, if it were up to me, the healthcare practitioner that I sort of idolized during school was Gregory House, MD.
Yes,
because he was,
that.
he always wanted to be right.
Yeah.
And didn't care how he had to get to the right answer.
Yes.
And I sort of idolize that, being able to do that. Now, of course, that's not practical. You're not going to build a practice if you're, calling your patients names and, and completely disregarding their feelings. So, one thing that I've kind of looked into, and I haven't spent enough time applying it, is the practice of motivational interviewing techniques, because that sort of systematizes, again, that forming that emotional connection, or at least, building those listening skills and being able to reflect back to patients. So I think that, probably would be one of the skills that I would put at the top of what a 5 might want to look into and implement to overcome some of those limitations.
Well, and it makes sense too, because something like motivational interviewing or, procedures like it's something for you to also learn about. So you get to fulfill that desire. So it's not just, okay, how can I mimic something? It's, I've heard this works well. how can I actually learn something new and apply it for a specific result? So I have a crazy story, and I'm not going to say his name unless he wants me to later, but I have a good friend who's a chiropractor as well. He's phenomenal, one of the smartest people I know. And as he was going through the chiropractic schooling and training, he realized that this was also his same weakness. So before he actually graduated, his goal was to figure out a way to overcome this. So he literally painfully just sat down night after night after night, researching things like motivational interviewing, researching every single kind of personality in the world, researching all kinds of communication tips and just general insights. And he became obsessed. And so literally to the point where he now knows how to handle just about every single situation. I mean, it's outstanding. And for him, it's robotic. He sees something happen, boom, I have an algorithm in my brain. This is how to respond. Patient is happy, therefore I'm happy. It's outstanding. And he, on the flip side, did the same thing for public speaking. And this is where it gets really fascinating. He read every single book out there on public speaking because he was a great speaker, but when he would speak, it was robotic. Because when he would talk, he wouldn't say the normal pauses and have inflection at the right times. And there was no emotion that came out, even though he was passionate and so excited inside. So he studied this stuff night and day, down to the point where he will insert a pause or a comma or a laugh or a sense of surprise during his presentations because he knows how the audience is going to respond. Again, it's science, right? It's direct, cause and effect that he studied. And now because of that, he can still be the personality, be the person that he is, but make everyone else around him just as happy. And to me, it's just fascinating. But only a type 5 brain, I would think, could do it. So I'm thinking he's a type 5 right now.
That's very interesting. Please get me in touch.
I will.
And ask him to put together a weekend seminar that I can take.
Honestly, it's not a bad idea because how many people are healthcare providers and are introverts?
Yeah. I think, introversion is much more common than society wants you to believe. In fact, it is the majority. If you read, what are the books? Quiet and, Introvert Power and those types of books.
It makes sense.
Which I don't think in itself is problematic for healthcare providers. But a lot of those other, kind of like you mentioned, I also have had trouble with not so much speaking. I also have read a lot about that and have also been able to practice that. And so public speaking, as long as I'm prepared, is nothing that I'm afraid of, even though, I would rather speak to one person individually, which is why podcasting is something that appeals to me. But like dinner parties, no, thank you. Any more than 3 people in the room, I'm like, okay, I'm done. But public speaking is totally fine. And so anyway, I think it's important for people to understand kind of those nuances about a lot of these characteristics that certainly being a type 5 in no means is a complete limitation for being a good healthcare provider, but leaning on those strengths and whether it's if that person is a 5 and systematizing
I'm
the
very
interactions.
Curious. I'm going to ask him, and I hope he already knows, but if not, I will have him take the test. But I really like that you say that because, in my training, I'm not sure about yours, I remember people telling us that in order to have a successful practice, we had to be an extrovert. We had to be outgoing. We had to be comfortable talking. And I understand at times where that can be very beneficial, 100%. But I remember thinking to myself, as an extreme extrovert, how can we limit somebody like that? If you're actually an introvert, you're not just going to wake up in a couple years and magically be an extrovert.
Change.
And I remember being, really frustrated by that because you can't just tell people to change overnight like that. So I like your take on it. Recognize who you are and how you want to do things. Find your strengths, find your weaknesses. And that's exactly why we're doing this series, because in healthcare, we need to be in tune with this to better serve our patients, but also to serve ourselves as healthcare providers. We are only as good as we are we're only as good as we are feeling. If we are having a great day versus a bad day, knowing how to attack that head on, and what better way than to understand yourself from within and know how to follow that up. I mean, that's why I love the Enneagram test, to be honest. I just feel like I've taken many, many tests as well, but I feel like this one, I can find a strength or flaw and I can immediately attack it head on. And it's just very direct to me. It can get really in depth when you dive into the wings and things like that. But at the core, I think it can really benefit our patients. Anything else regarding type 1? I mean, any last words of advice for our listeners?
I'm trying to think, I think that, just as you said, I'll just reiterate that learning about yourself is probably the key, especially if you're an extrovert. I don't think there's a lot that lends itself to a lot of the things that you need to be to grow a practice and to build a practice and gain a following. But particularly for those people who are more introverted like myself, learning about yourself and becoming aware of those strengths and limitations, and then embracing your strengths. There's an argument to be made for improving upon your weaknesses, right? I think you need to do that, but I think there becomes a point of diminishing returns with that. And there's a whole book about this that I read in college. If you look into the field of positive psychology, which kind of came from Martin Seligman, who has a few great books, but the one called Authentic Happiness, he makes an argument for spending more time developing your strengths than you do improving upon your weaknesses. And I found that to be, for one thing, just more fulfilling. Yeah. Because you don't feel like you're beating yourself with a stick all the time and just trying to get, trying to get over these weaknesses. And like you said, if you are introverted, that's not something that you can just change. I've heard a lot of practitioners who are introverted say, the way I deal with it is when I'm in the office, I just put on a different persona. And that may work. That's just not something that I could do. Mm-hmm. I mean, I certainly tried, but I think that can lead to burnout very quickly.
I think so too.
I mean, I'm incriminating myself here, but I mentioned that I did locum work, and I learned fairly quickly that probably was not the ideal type of practice for me, because many of the clinics that I would cover were high volume practices, oftentimes with open layouts, right, where multiple practitioners and patients in one room being treated, and that is not my ideal environment. And as much as I tried to kind of mold myself to that clinic, there were times where I just had to take a break and go to the bathroom and lock myself in there for 10 minutes just to kind of calm down. And so knowing that, that's not the type of practice I'm going to build. I'm not going to want to go to work every day and put on a face. I mentioned Peter Attia. If you look at a lot of other similar healthcare providers, they've built much more concierge type practices where they can spend the time learning the science and finding out how to apply that, and kind of like the person you mentioned, like learning these skills. They spend more time there to then be able to provide the best care that they can on a much smaller scale, but then they can make it more of a higher end practice, maybe cash, self-pay. And so there are, I don't want people to look at me and say, oh gosh, type 5, I'm not going to do well. No, there's so many ways to get around, these limiting characteristics. And so learning about yourself, whether it's with the Enneagram or with the Myers-Briggs, or my personal favorite lately has been what's called the Sparketype.
Oh, what's that?
This is one, another podcaster who does a lot of things, might even be a type 5 because he's always got different projects, came up based on some of his consulting and different things, came up with the spark type, which he describes as the thing that basically lights you up, right? So what is the thing that you wake up in the morning excited to do? And he's got, I think it's 12 different spark types. And mine happens to be the Maven scientist, which these overlap really well. So the thing that I'm driven to do is to learn based on the spark type. And the scientist aspect of it is to answer big questions. So whether it's that, there's so many other ones, color of your parachute and the big 5, all these different things that you can go out and find. And then, of course, much more questionable ones that you just take on Facebook that just pop up. Whatever it is, I think these things do serve as a great foundation for having conversations about what helps you thrive, what areas you struggle with in communication, interpersonal relationships, whether that's within your family or with patients. And just becoming aware of that, the earlier the better.
Definitely.
Can really set you up for success.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. I know everyone, especially our type 5 listeners, are going to love this. So thank you so much for joining us on BDP. We appreciate it.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for tuning in to the Provider's Report. We hope you found today's episode valuable and inspiring. To stay updated with our latest episodes, subscribe to our podcast wherever you like to listen. For more resources and continuing education opportunities, visit our website. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of our patients and truly set a standard for value-based healthcare.